there, I'm Karen Roby alongside Bill Detweiler here today talking about Apple, the keynote address from the Worldwide Developers Conference, the annual platform used to unveil some impressive software enhancements that we're going to talk about, and the new Mac Pro, which we'll get to as well. But Bill, just off the top, let's start with privacy. What did we learn on this?
Yeah, so throughout the presentation, privacy was definitely front and center. So several references were made to encryption and how individuals' devices that use, people who use Apple's product, how their individual or how their information is going to be processed on the device. Everything from Apple's Maps app and location data, new health data, a new feature called Sign In with Apple that allows you to sign in to websites and use a throwaway randomly generated email address. The new Find My feature built into the MacOS, voice control built into macOS. All of these features are really unique, but Apple definitely wanted to drive home that they were really thinking about privacy and security on their devices and making sure that people understood with the new features that were in these devices that also a lot of that processing is being done on the device, and the information is either staying on the device and is encrypted, or if it is being transmitted to Apple, to iCloud, it's going to have end-to-end encryption as well. They also referenced They also made several references to things like HomeKit secure video. That was a new new feature. New service they launched, and then HomeKit on the router. Again, with an emphasis towards securing the information that you're providing through Apple apps. And again, more controls for people who want to, for how people allow apps to share their information. So maybe you want to allow app to share information one time, but then you want to be prompted every time after that if it's going to share like location information, things like that. So that was something that we saw multiple times, and no doubt in response to a little bit of the recent kind of negative coverage that Apple has gotten about how often apps on iOS devices actually track your information and maybe return that information back to, if not Apple, maybe a third party.
Yeah, and privacy is definitely top of mind, for everybody right now. Talk a little bit, Bill, about machine learning. Those brought up several times.
Yeah, so along with privacy, machine learning was another big theme of the show. You saw it referenced several times, in whether it's in apps. They made references to how machine learning is going to make finding your photos a little bit easier. The activity app on the WatchOS, and health data. They made mention of how machine learning is going to be used there. Also, one of the more interesting announcements was what they call natural text to speech, or TTS, that's going to be built into Siri. This is using, again, machine learning to provide more naturally sounding responses from Siri as she or he, depending on what voice you have, reads back text to you. So that is something that wasn't a specific announcement in the show, but you can see how technologies like AI and machine learning are used behind the scenes to make all these apps function a little better.
All right, and when it comes to hardware, as we mentioned, it's time to cue the memes here, as we're already starting to see on Twitter with the cheese grater, things like this with the new Mac Pro. So talk a little bit about it, the specs, and that price point as well.
Yeah, so Apple has foregone, thankfully, in my opinion, the trash can design of the 2013 Mac Pro and gone with what people are sort of referring to as this big cheese grater type tower. It's very much a throwback to the older Mac Pros that were traditional tower PCs that most people remember. And the big thing here is this is really a Hail Mary pass to creatives. Almost all of the demos that they showed during the event were aimed at either music editing, video editing, photography, people who are 3D game development, app development. So these are going to be high-end workstations aimed at people who are doing what we would call creative tasks. You're probably not going to buy one of these to have in your house and just play games on. That's not going to be what the machines are for. They've got support for new Intel Xeon processors up to 28 cores. These things can support up to these new NVIDIA Duo graphics cards with some new architecture that links them together. You can have 2 of those in the machine, tons of ports on the outside of it, 2 gigabit Ethernet ports, tons of RAM, tons of storage, and they're customizable. So you've got, as opposed to the old trash can Mac, which was really not very, you couldn't take parts out of it and put parts into it, upgrade it very easily. This one is designed to be able to do that. It's modular inside. It has very good airflow through it. It's really a return to the Mac Pros of the past. And that's a good thing, I think, if you ask most people who work on these, and especially most in IT who support them, because it means you'll have a larger upfront cost, but you'll be able to keep them relevant and keep them updated for a longer period of time. So that brings you to the price. I mean, the base model of this is going to run about $6 grand. $599 is what they're going to start at. And then if you want one of the really good ones, I can see this going for well above $10,000, easily $10,000 to $15,000. And go along with it. If that wasn't enough, again, for creatives here, they released a brand new display. They're calling it the Pro Display XDR, and it's a really nice display. It's 32 inches. It has basically what they're calling extreme dynamic range, or HDR. It's designed to show colors and show contrasts that are more accurate to what HDR displays will show. It's going to look great for people who are editing 8K video, for people who are editing 4K video, for anyone doing really high-end photo editing. It's going to be fantastic. It's also going to be $5,000.
Just for the display.
Just for the display.
Yeah.
Now, they also showed off a really interesting stand that goes with the display. This stand is really cool. It allows you to articulate the display up and down and tilt it, and then you can actually rotate it around for portrait mode. That's something really cool, especially if you're doing large scale like magazine layouts or editing on a web page, although who needs a $6,000 machine to write code unless you're doing really high-end stuff. That stand of itself is going to be another $1,000. If you want it, yes, you know, we're hearing that it will actually come with a cheaper stand in the box, so you don't have to like lay the screen flat on your table unless you pay an extra grand. But if you do want this really nice display that they showed off at the press conference, it's going to be even more. So this is one of those devices that the average consumer, even the average high-end Apple consumer, is probably not going to purchase. But if you're a high-end sort of video editing, photo editing, working in a 3D game studio, working in a 3D film studio, yeah, you'll probably buy some of these.
Yeah, and we're already seeing, obviously, on social media, too, people, the excitement coming from those that are doing that type of high-end work. But when we talk about, as you mentioned, more of the average person, we can talk about the watch, because there's a lot of people running around with these on now, and some real differences with the watch. Yeah,
a lot of new stuff with the watch that has to do with separating the watch from the iPhone. You know, since the WatchOS release, it's really been an accessory to the iPhone. You couldn't install apps on the watch directly without using the watch app on the iPhone. Now you will be able to. So with the new release of WatchOS, you're going to be able to have the App Store directly on the watch. You're going to be able to install apps natively from the watch, which is really cool. You'll also be able to do more. They introduced an audio streaming API for the watch, so you'll be able to actually stream audio like podcasts directly to the watch. I mean, you could already play music with a wireless set of headphones from the watch. Now you'll be able to stream like podcasts, things like that from the watch. So all designed to make it less an accessory and more a standalone device by itself.
And I think people were hoping for that, or looking towards that coming, you know, to be more of an independent device. So that's good. So let's switch gears here, Bill, from the watch and other hardware to the Mac OS.
Yeah, so with macOS, you know, this is the big event where each year where Apple usually shows the preview of the new version of its operating systems. And so a lot of new features there. We are going to have macOS Catalina. And so we expect that to come out in the fall. Developer kits are going to be available now, and then the public seed is available in July. So a lot of new features with Mac OS that look pretty cool. Two of the ones that I thought were really for our audience, business pros, Find My is really interesting, and then Activation Lock also really interesting. Again, two security and privacy features that I thought were really kind of cool. Find My is an extension or sort of an amped up version of Find My iPhone, right? We've all seen Find My iPhone, Find My iPad, you know, sort of this Find My device feature, which is really cool. If you lose your iPhone, if you lose your iPad, if it's stolen or something like that, you can use this to locate the device, cause it to make a sound, see its last known location, if it's hit Wi-Fi or if it's hit the internet, all kinds of things like that. Really cool. With the Find My app or the Find My service here, what you're going to be able to do with Macs is actually detect a lost MacBook even when it's not online. So what it's going to do is kind of like a mesh network functionality is it's going to emit a Bluetooth signal, really sort of low data, sort of low power Bluetooth signal when it's offline that other iOS devices in its area, so for example, if you or other Mac devices in the area, even that aren't connected to that device. So for example, everyone else's device essentially sort of become a way to track Mac devices. And so it'll be able to kind of like everybody has those Bluetooth trackers, right? Attached to their keys or attached to your bags. This is kind of like that, right? Where it can reach out to, you can signal like, hey, I can't find my device. I need to know where it is. And it will, iClouds will be able to show you, hey, this device is here. The lid's closed. It's not on Wi-Fi. It's not on the network. It's not hitting the internet. But because of this Bluetooth signal, maybe my Mac is sitting in a coffee shop somewhere where I left it, and you're sitting there with your iPhone in the table next to it. That's how I will find out where it is. Now that raises huge, especially in the enterprise, security and privacy concerns, right? So again, Apple went out of its way during the press conference to iterate that number one, this is really low power, so it's not going, and it's low bandwidth, so you don't have to worry about battery life. Also, it's all data is all end-to-end encrypted and anonymized. So Apple doesn't know, or the data as it's flowing back to Apple doesn't know that it's your computer till you log in and it sees the signal. So again, privacy and security being woven into these kind of cool new features. The other one is Activation Lock. I think that's cool as well. For Activation Lock, any device or MacBook with the new their T2 chip that runs in it, if you indicate that the MacBook is stolen or within your laptop is stolen, it will lock the machine so that it can't be booted, it can't be rebooted, nothing can be installed. You can't hit supposedly you're not going to be able to hit the underlying, the software that sort of lies underneath the operating system without being able to provide your login credentials. So that's another thing that definitely is cool. Those two things, cool for macOS for the enterprise, the business user.
Yeah, most definitely. And there's so much really it was 2 hours and 18 minutes. So a lot of ground covered there. But, you know, developers tools, though, let's end on that, Bill, because that really applies to our audience as well. What's new here? Yeah, so a lot of really cool things for developers. Unfortunately, as you talked about, this was a 2 hour plus WWDC kickoff keynote, and it's probably one of the longest ones I've seen. So I wish they would put some of this stuff up front, but you know, they save it for the end. They go with all the flashy TV OS and stuff up front. So a couple things here.
One, Project Catalyst. They talked a lot about this. Now, this is going to allow developers to create macOS apps based on iPad apps very kind of quickly. It's just tools that if you've already built an iPad app, you can translate that into a native macOS app without having to completely rewrite the code. Now, that's really cool. You think, well, why does that matter? It's in the enterprise environment, if you're doing app development and you have a single team of developers that maybe specialize in a specific OS, or you only have a limited amount of resources, it really helps to be able to quickly iterate to multiple platforms. And so one of the demos, one of my favorite demos, and this kind of shows how, sort of geeky and sort of enterprise geeky we are at the show, not the AR Minecraft demo, which we'll maybe talk about in a little bit,
right.
but was the Atlassian demo. So Atlassian was showing off their Jira Cloud app, basically. And so Jira, the ticket tracking, the bug tracking system that a lot of enterprises use, they have an iPad app for Jira Cloud. They were building a native Mac OS app based on using Project Catalyst tools. Now, that's really cool because native apps sometimes can run more quickly, updates can be done more easily, you get speed, less latency, more speed than you would using a web-based or a browser-based app. So that's really kind of cool, allows you to have one code base, one development team, and build native enterprise apps a little more easily. Two other ones on the AR side that was really kind of cool, they showed off ARKit 3, some updates for that, and then RealityKit, new tools that they're bringing to allow people to do things like the new updates to ARKit and RealityKit are going to make developing augmented reality apps much easier, much faster, but also do really cool things like people occlusion. That was some of the demos they showed. So if you want to have a person in the AI app or they're in the picture, then the background around them can be something else, and it will automatically filter them out. You don't have to do that. It was a very complicated process to do it before. This is going to do it much more easily. So it's kind of like a green screen. Like if we were on set here and we had a green screen behind us, right, where you have to do a lot of work. Our video editors behind the camera, you do a lot of work whenever you see that, right? This makes it a lot easier for AR and AR apps. The other one, Swift UI, another tool that they announced, again, at the end of the, at the end of the show. You would think that at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, they would lead with the developer stuff, but they don't. They saved it to the end. But it was, they did save some of the best developer stuff to the end. Swift UI was another one, and it basically allows you to really quickly sort of build these apps with a limited amount of code. One of the demos they showed was a randomized naming tool for the new version of macOS. It was kind of a little tongue-in-cheek thing where they were trying to say we could use some photos, build this really quick little UI, port that into ARKit, and see what that was going to look like. They suggested naming the next macOS release Flying Squirrel, which I thought was pretty cool there. So we did get developer tools at the end, and some that are going to be pretty kind of powerful once people start to dig in. And all this stuff is going to be in Xcode, so if you're using the environment already, you're going to be able to sort of use these right away.
And, they did, as you just mentioned, they had some fun with it, too. Even poking fun of themselves a little bit, I think, with iTunes and what more could they possibly include in iTunes. And as you mentioned, too, the new things that are going to be with Minecraft.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about iTunes. One of the biggest sort of things to come out of the conference and much speculated about was the death of iTunes. Right. Apple has decided to do away with iTunes. And now when you plug your iPhone up to the laptop, to your Mac, nothing happens, which is fantastic. I love that as someone that hated seeing iTunes pop up every time I connected my phone to my computer. Right. You'll now be able to sync your phone. Your device will show up in Finder. So real easy to find. And you're just going to have basically music, a new podcasts app, which is really kind of cool, and TV. So that's going to be, they showed off a new version of tvOS early in the show, and some of the TV Plus features that they're going to have. And so that's how they're going to deliver music. So there was just a lot to unpack here, both on the consumer side and on the enterprise side.
Yeah, we're just kind of scratching the surface here with some of the highlights. There's a lot more that was even discussed there today. But, when it comes to the Developers Conference here for 2019, we do have you covered. All the details you need, analysis, much, much more. It's all on ZDNet and Tech Republic.